Hello and welcome to On Books. Today I have in my hand a copy of The Most Good You Can Do. This is a book that came out last year by Peter Singer. Peter Singer is the Australian philosopher who has been writing about ethics and doing good with our lives ever since the mid-70s. He is prolific and his writing is powerful and has inspired millions at this point. He was named one of Time Magazine's top 100 most influential people in 2005. And his writing, this book, along with two other books that we'll be examining, are perfect. They really came to me at a good time on this quest to figure out how do I leave the planet, leaving it potentially better than how it was. A lot of these questions that I've been conflicted with and wondering, is my giving effective? Are the things that I'm doing every day that I think are maybe good, are they good at all? This book is just filled with people who are inspiring and changing the world in amazing ways. And what a great time for me to share this with you as you think through maybe some of these similar questions of, debating where you put your energy and your time and just wondering if it's good. And seriously, no judgments. This is all about learning and expanding our minds. And I think Peter Singer, he comes at it with that approach. Some of the writing in here is a bit strong in that he's making arguments. It gets a little academic at points, which is great for our conversation here because I'll try to break it down and give you some of the highlights. But in that, he is arguing pretty strongly on some of these points on what you can be doing. And I think the takeaway is then, it's up to each of us to apply that to our own lives and make our own decisions. So I'm here on this journey, just trying to learn and just trying to make some sense out of the energy that I am, putting forward at work with my friends and the buying choices that I make. All of this that we've been talking for about 4 or 5 episodes into the series on social good. So please join me. This is The Most Good You Can Do. The Most Good You Can Do is based around this idea of effective altruism. Effective altruism is a new movement that has been emerging over the past few years, and there's been a lot of lively discussion about it in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Other people are writing about it. There's a whole Wikipedia page that you can read about it. Effective altruism is this idea that we should do the most good we can. Effective altruism, reading from Wikipedia, it says, effective altruism is a philosophy and a social movement that applies evidence and reason to determining the most effective ways we can improve the world. So the important part here is not just the altruism, not just the giving of ourselves, but the effectiveness, so that we know when we give that there is something being done with that donation or our time or our energy or whatever we're giving, so that we know that scientifically with some numbers and some data that it is proving to be effective. And it also, therefore, gives us a way to look at 2 options, 3 options, many options, and rank them to make sure that we're putting our time and energy in the right place. So I'm going to begin by reading a little bit from the start of the book here and defining what effective altruism is and what it means to do the most good. From there, I'll give just kind of brief synopses of each of the chapters that go into the people who are effective altruists and some of the ways that you can become, or at least consider becoming, an effective altruist and what that might mean. So let's start here right at the top of the book, the chapter 1. Chapter 1 is, what is effective altruism? I met Matt Waga in 2009 when he took my practical ethics class at Princeton University. In the readings related to global poverty and what we ought to be doing about it, he found an estimate of how much it costs to save the life of one of the millions of children who die each year from diseases that we can prevent or cure. So this led Matt to calculate how many lives could he save over his lifetime, assuming that he earned an average income and donated, say, 10% of it to highly effective organizations. For example, one providing families with bed nets to prevent malaria. So malaria, it's a major killer of children, especially in Africa. He discovered that he could, with that level of donation, save about 100 lives. So he thought to himself, okay, well, suppose you see a burning building and you run through the flames and kick open the door, and you let 100 people out, that would be the greatest moment in your life. And he thought, wow, well, I could do as much good as that. 2 years later, Matt graduated. His senior thesis received the philosophy department's prize for the best thesis of the year. He was accepted by the University of Oxford for postgraduate study. Many students who major in philosophy dream of an opportunity like that. I know I did, writes Peter. But by then, Matt had done a lot of thinking about it and discussed it with others about what career would do him the most good. And so this led him to a very different choice. He took a job on Wall Street, working for an arbitrage trading firm. Yeah, surprising, right? So here's the logic. On a higher income, he would be able to give much more, both as a percentage and in dollars, than just, giving 10% of a professor's income. 1 year after graduating, Matt was donating a six-figure sum, roughly half of his annual earnings, to highly effective charities. He was on his way to saving 100 lives. And now, not only in his entire career, but in the first year or two of working, and then every year thereafter, 100 lives. So Matt is an example that Peter Singer gives of an effective altruist, and he starts the book off with the story of Matt. And Matt's choice of a career is one of several possible ways of being an effective altruist, and one of the many ways that are illustrated in this book. So what is an effective altruist? Well, I'm going to give you a few bullet points to define the term here. Effective altruists do things like the following. They live modestly and donate a large part of their income, often more than the traditional tenth or a little tithe that you give to most charities. Effective altruists are researching and discussing with others as to which charities are the most effective and which ones have research done by independent evaluators or, the reputable ones, stuff like that. Effective altruists choose a career in which they can earn the most, not in order to be, just to be affluent or buy a yacht or any of that kind of stuff, but just so that you can do the most good. It's part of the plan for making money. Effective altruists talk to others in person or online about giving so that the idea of effective altruism will spread. And finally, another way that you can be an effective altruist is giving a part of your body, whether that's blood, bone marrow, donating a kidney, even if it's to a stranger. All right, I'm going to shut up now for just a second and let Peter Singer himself explain to you a few effective altruists. They're described here in the book, but in his TED Talk, which I'm going to play for you in a second, he'll go through William McCaskill, who is also who also pioneered this movement of effective altruism with Peter Singer and a few others, as well as Matt, who I just mentioned. His story will be mentioned here. And the question here is, how do you find a career that will do the most good? And it might not necessarily be joining a charity, right? William McCaskill, who is about to be introduced, will say, yeah, don't join a charity. Go do the thing that Matt did. Go join Wall Street and give more money. You have that option. It's not the only option. It's not like he's not saying you have to do this, but it is one thing that people maybe don't consider. And so let me let Peter explain it to you in his own words. This is from Peter's TED Talk.
One person who's thought quite a bit about this issue of how you can have a career that will have the helping to fight global poverty. Now, mentioning time might lead you to think, well, should I abandon my career and put all of my time into saving some of these 19,000 lives that are lost every day? One person who's thought quite a bit about this issue of how you can have a career that will have the biggest impact for good in the world is Will Crouch. He's a graduate student in philosophy. And he set up a website called 80,000 Hours, the number of hours he estimates most people spend on their career, to advise people on how to have the best, most effective career. But you might be surprised to know that one of the careers that he encourages people to consider, if they have the right abilities and character, is to go into banking or finance. Why? Because if you earn a lot of money, you can give away a lot of money. And if you're successful in that career, you could give enough to an aid organization so that it could employ, let's say, 5 aid workers in developing countries. And each one of them would probably do about as much good as you would have done. So you can quintuple the impact by leading that kind of career. Here's one young man who's taken this advice. His name is Matt Wager. He was a student at Princeton in philosophy and math. Actually won the prize for the best undergraduate philosophy thesis last year when he graduated. But he's gone into finance in New York. He's already earning enough so that he's giving a 6-figure sum to effective charities and still leaving himself with enough to live on. Matt has also helped me to set up an organisation that I'm working with that has the name taken from the title of a book I wrote, The Life You Can Save, which is trying to change our culture so that more people think that if we're going to live an ethical life, it's not enough just to follow the thou shalt nots and not cheat, steal, maim, kill, but that if we have enough, we have to share some of that with people who have so little. And the organisation draws together people of different generations, like Holly Morgan, who's an undergraduate who's pledged to give 10% of the little amount that she has, and on the right, Ada Wan, who has worked directly for the poor, but has now gone to Yale to do an MBA to have more to give.
All right, so a few questions that you might be wondering about effective altruism and doing the most good that you can do. So what counts as the most good? Okay, so effective altruisms will not always give the same answer to this, but there are some values that are persistent in this book that you will see they all share. So some of these values that effective altruists share, they would agree that the world is a better place with less suffering and more happiness. And then, of course, that's better than a world with more suffering and less happiness. Would you agree or disagree? So most effective altruists will say that a world in which people live longer is better than one where people live shorter lives. And this value is a crucial part of the effective altruist movement, because in thinking about helping people who can live longer lives than shorter lives, part of that means that when we choose to give, being the most effective means to save a life rather than just extend someone's life by a few years. And some of that comes down to making hard decisions about where we give our money. Peter Singer will argue that we should give it globally, give it to people, where $1 or $2 might save a child's life somewhere in a country in Africa versus, the amount of money that it would take to save, somebody in America with a more general problem, like a cancer, where you might need thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to even make a dent, and we don't know where it's going. Being more effective means going to the place of least resistance and giving that money and making an impact immediately if possible. Does everyone's suffering count equally? Peter Singer writes, effective altruists do not discount suffering because it is far away or in another country, or if it afflicts people of a different race or religion. Effective altruists agree that the suffering of animals counts too, and generally agree that we should not give less consideration to suffering just because the victim is not a member of our own species. They may differ, however, on how they weigh the type of suffering an animal can experience and the type of suffering humans can get experience. And this book goes a little deeper into those levels. But in general, every human is looked at as being equal. All right, so that's how the book starts. That's chapter 1, and it really sets us up for this idea of effective altruism and doing the most good that we can do. Each of the subsequent chapters goes into some evidence, argument, story about how you can do that most good, because there's a few different ways. I mean, I just shared the story with Matt. You can make a career change or the career you're even at right now, and giving a percentage of your money to charity, to an effective charity. And well, let's start there, because maybe the first question that you're wondering, and something that I've for sure thought of, is which charity to give to and how much. Furthermore, I've been frustrated in the past when giving, because I always wonder, like, is my money reaching the people that I hope for it to reach? Is it being used effectively? I had some concerns too about that, about using my money to give to a donation and then getting that money back in postcards or marketing or email, and then being like, oh my God, all the money that I've been giving is just coming back to me in marketing materials, and getting really frustrated by that. This book has challenged that a little bit. I'm going to give you some notes on that, as well as this TED Talk, which I saw yesterday, which apparently is legendary, especially in the social media, the social good sector. And it was a bit controversial, by Dan Pallotta. I could put a link to that in the show notes on the website, and in which he really addresses, it's such a great talk, which he addresses that the overhead of a charity isn't as important as the impact that they're having, and to think about nonprofits and those kind of companies the same way that we we invest in startups or Apples or Googles, and we allow them to have overhead and make mistakes. and looking at the bottom line of what is effective. So there is this whole body of research and science and academia looking at the effectiveness of these charities. And you can start to go down that rabbit hole, and it is fascinating. But if you don't want to, there is, and this is where Peter Singer's book and the argument comes into place, there is the site GiveWell. If you haven't heard of it before, GiveWell ranks the top-rated charities so that you can be confident that your donations will do good and be highly cost-effective. So there's a lot written in this chapter on being part of the effective altruist movement, on what GiveWell is doing and how their whole system works. So that is a great place to start. Okay, so in what other ways can you be an effective altruist? Well, I just mentioned GiveWell, and like I said, GiveWell ranks some of the top most effective charities, and so that's clearly a place to start. But if you didn't want to go with GiveWell, or you had another charity on your mind, Peter Singer has this chapter here called Domestic or Global, which goes into some of the arguments on where you may consider giving your money. In this chapter, he writes, "You may have received appeals for donations from charities in affluent countries that provide blind people with guide dogs. That sounds like a cause worthy of support, until you consider the costs and the alternatives to which you could donate. It costs about $40,000 to supply one person in the United States with a guide dog. Most of the expense is incurred in training the dog and the recipient. But the cost of preventing someone from going blind because of trachoma, the most common cause of preventable blindness, so to do that, it would be within the range of only $20 to $100. So if you do the math, you'll see the choice we face is to provide one person with a guide dog or prevent anywhere between 400 and 2,000 cases of blindness in developing countries." All right, so let's go to the next chapter. So the next chapter is called Reducing Animal Suffering and Protecting Nature. If we abide by the definition of doing the most good as living in a world with less suffering and more happiness, then giving to charities that rescue pets, mostly dogs and cats, or attempt to find homes for them, is not necessarily the most good you can do, according to Peter Singer. So he writes, "The suffering of abused pets amounts to a tiny fraction of the suffering we inflict on animals. In 2012, there were 164 million owned dogs and cats in the United States. The majority of them probably live pretty good lives, but even if every one of them were abused, this number would be dwarfed by the," and this is a huge number, 9.1 billion animals annually raised and slaughtered for food in the United States. And just to repeat that, 9.1 billion is more than every single person on this planet right now in the amount of animals dies every year. That's like every single person on the planet dying every year, being born and dying every year. Factory farmed animals have to endure a lifetime of suffering much more severe than the typical dog or cat. And in the United States, there are 55 times as many factory farmed animals as there are dogs and cats. This chapter goes on to argue that, yes, doing the most good, one way of doing the most good is to reduce animal suffering. And not only that, but by doing that, you are also protecting the planet. I'm sure that's something you've heard about before. In this chapter, there's a quote from Ben West, and he writes, "Even if your goal were solely to slow down climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, you could do that more effectively by donating to organizations that are encouraging people to go vegetarian or vegan than by donating to leading carbon offsetting organizations." All right, and to close this out, finally, one way that you can do the most good, according to Peter Singer in this book, is by donating part of yourself, part of your blood, your body, even your kidney to another person. And in this book, I hadn't realized this. This is a pretty astonishing figure, but every day in America, apparently, 14 people die on a waiting list waiting for a kidney. And had they had the kidney donated, they may have survived. So that's just the facts on the ground. That's how it goes. And in this book, there's someone who writes Peter Singer who donated his kidney to a stranger. I'm going to let him take it from here. This is an excerpt from his TED Talk, Peter Singer's TED Talk, and I'll let him finish it out with this story. Okay.
I'm going to conclude by telling you about an email that I received while I was writing this letter, this talk, just a month or so ago, from a man named Chris Croy, who I'd never heard of. This is a picture of him, showing him recovering from surgery. Why was he recovering from surgery? The email began, "Last Tuesday, I anonymously donated my right kidney to a stranger. That started a kidney chain which enabled 4 people to receive kidneys." There's about 100 people each year in the US and more in other countries who do that. I was pleased to read it. Chris went on to say that he'd been influenced by my writings in what he did. Well, I have to admit I'm also somewhat embarrassed by that, because I still have 2 kidneys. But Chris went on to say that he didn't think that what he'd done was all that amazing, because he calculated that the number of life years that he had added to people, the extension of life, was about the same that you could achieve if you gave $5,000 to the Against Malaria Foundation. And that did make me feel a little bit better, because I have given more than $5,000 to the Against Malaria Foundation and to various other effective charities. So if you're feeling bad because you still have 2 kidneys as well, there's a way for you to get off the hook. Thank you.
All right, thanks again for listening to On Books. If you enjoyed On Books, you can subscribe on iTunes. It's free. All of the quotes and book notes from this book, The Most Good You Can Do, are available on my website. That's on-books.com. You can also sign up for the mailing list and get some exclusive videos, essays, extra interviews, a lot of different things around these books that I'll be giving away. I usually send out an email maybe once or twice a month. So if you want to get on that list, you'll get those as well. Next week, I'll be bringing you The Life You Can Save. That's Peter Singer's other book, which gives a little bit more of the why. If you're leaving this episode wondering, okay, this is how you can do this. These are some people who are rich, or these are some people who are brave or unlike me. I think after reading this book, I came to The Life You Can Save, and that gave me a little bit more of the feeling like, oh, this is something that applies to everyone. And it really breaks down a lot of the arguments and objections that Peter Singer has been having these conversations for over 30 years. And he puts it into this book in a really nice, readable way. So I'm excited to bring you that. And of course, soon after that, I'll be bringing you an interview. Peter Singer is going to come on the show to chat with us and give some follow-up to us here. So I am super excited and looking forward to that. So please stay tuned and keep reading. Talk to you soon.